When Mother Nature unleashes her fury, catastrophic damage and destruction can be the result. Violent weather events like tornadoes, hurricanes, ice storms, microbursts, and floods pose grave danger and risks for everyone, but especially for those who work outside, like first responders, highway crews, utility employees, forest industry personnel, and agricultural employees. The most common forms of storm damage are uprooted trees, lodged trees, broken tops, and other hazards that produce tension wood or wood in a bind. Tension wood can cause serious bodily injury or death to an untrained, unsuspecting worker. If at all possible, let the storm-damaged timber rest before beginning cleanup. Time will allow some of the tension to relax, thus reducing the likelihood of injury. This video will deal with loss control issues during storm restoration and salvage operations. Loss control focuses on one driving issue: reducing risk. Risk is the key building block for any incident. Eliminate the risk, and you've eliminated the incident and possible injury. It is very important to plan the salvage operation thoroughly. As you know, a good plan will increase safety and efficiency throughout the cleanup process. Efficiency leads to reduced risk and increased productivity. When you arrive at the site, first of all, study the direction of the wind throw or blowdown. Then, study the terrain for slope and wet areas. These hazards can increase risk and reduce efficiency if not dealt with in a pre-harvest plan. Proper deck or landing placement is very important. A properly located staging area greatly enhances safety and efficiency during the operation. Remember several important safety considerations as you choose the deck site. Study access to the highway. Make sure you have clear visibility to safely enter and leave the highway. If possible, locate the deck away from the direction of the wind-thrown timber for skidding the butts with ease. And remember, proper deck placement makes skidding operations more efficient. Straight, direct access reduces the amount of movement a skidder must make. Environmentally, this can reduce soil compaction and avoid rutting. On the safety side, skid trails with straight shots do not force the pulled timber into a bind, which could injure ground workers. The preferred method of salvage is to use mechanized logging equipment. By doing this, a huge amount of risk can be reduced. Never put ground personnel at risk when the mechanical option is available. Fully enclosed equipment and rotational felling heads not only greatly reduce risk levels, but also add to the efficiency of the operation. Pull-through and stroke delimbers, as well as other mechanical processing equipment, increase safety and productivity on the modern logging job. Take great care to observe safe work zones and always protect workers on the ground. Skidders are useful tools to clean up storm damage, removing high-risk trees without using a chainsaw. No one is allowed within 300 feet of a felling machine. Obviously, this mandatory rule is designed to reduce the risk of injuries from flying debris and falling timber. Remember, the 300 feet rule is the industry standard for mechanical felling. Again, it can't be said enough. Always use mechanical methods wherever possible during any storm cleanup. However, if you find that mechanized salvage is impossible or limited, manual options can be used. It must be stressed, only fully trained and educated employees are allowed to work in a storm-damaged area. If you find you must do manual salvage in a blowdown, the chainsaw will be the most common tool. The chainsaw is the basic workhorse of the forest industry. In the hands of a skilled operator, the chainsaw can be a very efficient tool in storm damage cleanup. If misused, the chainsaw can be an instrument of injury or even death. Aside from being mandated by OSHA and most insurance carriers, your personal protective equipment, or PPE, provides a barrier from being injured on the job, from head to toe. Timber cutters and saw hands should always wear head protection in the form of hard hats and safety glasses. A complete hard hat package includes protection for the eyes and ears. In some instances, Gloves are useful and in some cases may be required. Safety cut-resistant leg wear, such as chaps or chainsaw pants, is mandatory while operating a chainsaw. Cut-resistant footwear reduces the risk of a crippling laceration to the feet. A personal first aid kit must be carried while in the field, and you should always wear high-visibility clothing. If you can be seen, you are less likely to be injured. Remember, your job safety policies also apply to any visitors. Over the years, chainsaw manufacturers have added many safety features to their saws to help protect users. All operators must know and fully understand the three basic safety features of the saw. First, make sure you are familiar with the operation of the chain brake. You should treat the chain brake the same way as you would the safety on a firearm. If it does not work, the saw must be placed out of service. The saw must be properly started with the chain brake engaged. For maximum safety, you should set the brake if you are walking further than 2 steps, or if you don't have both hands on the saw. Always carry a saw with the brake set. Another key safety feature is the throttle interlock. The throttle interlock system prevents the throttle from being depressed without having a good, safe grip on the rear handle of the saw. The throttle won't engage until the interlock is released. The interlock is a very important safety feature. It must never be overridden. The saw should be placed out of service if the interlock is in disrepair. Moving on to the third and last safety, the chain catch peg. The catch peg is located underneath the saw, on the clutch side. This peg protects you from being injured in case the chain fails or derails from the guide bar. Replace the catch peg when needed. Now let's talk about safe operations. Operating a chainsaw safely requires knowledge. Let's start with the saw's reactionary forces of the bar and chain. There are forces at play and are not evident until it is too late. By learning the reactionary forces, you will be able to anticipate and properly brace the saw while you cut in a variety of positions. The pulling chain is on the bottom side of the guide bar. When you are cutting with the bottom of the bar, the saw is pulled into the wood being cut. When you're making a cut with the top side of the guide bar, the saw tends to be pushed back towards the operator. This is very important. Kickback section. The kickback section is the top quadrant of the guide bar tip. This section of the bar must be avoided. Kickback happens 7 times faster than the human brain can react. In order to counter kickback forces, the operator must be in the habit of keeping his thumb wrapped around the top handle of the saw while the saw is in an upright position. The thumb wrap grip keeps the saw under control during the event of kickback. Severe, life-threatening lacerations can occur to the head and neck area if you don't use the proper grip. The next area on the saw is the attack corner. The lower quadrant of the guide bar tip is known as the attack corner. You'll use this area when you need to make a bore cut. Be sure to properly place the saw while the bore cut is being made, and make sure operators are properly trained prior to making bore cuts.
Yes, sir.
No matter the task you face, make sure you develop and follow a plan of action. An accident is an unplanned event. By using a well-thought-out plan, the risk of an incident is reduced considerably. Before you go to work topping and limbing, consider the risk that is present. The goal of using a plan is to establish safe and proper body placement. For example, if you aren't working under the snag, you won't be injured there. Just makes sense, right? Another example would be, if your saw hand isn't on the tensioned side of the limb or the stem, there's no way you'll get a broken leg. Before entering the hazard areas, always use the 5-part plan. The first part of the plan is to check for overhead hazards. Is there anything above me that could hurt me? Do not place yourself in danger. The second step in the plan is to check for spring poles. Be sure to look under the stem for hidden spring poles. The third part of the plan is to determine front load or back load. Will the stem move forward or spring back when a cut is made? The fourth and most important step in the plan is to determine the side load of the stem. The side load identifies the good side or the bad side of a tree or limb. Keep your body on the good side or compressed side of the tree. Compressed wood can be found on the inside of the bow or arch. The wood on the outside is being stretched and is the tensioned side of the tree. Remember, tension wood is the bad side. When tensioned wood is cut, the reaction is fast and most times very violent. You won't be hurt if you stay away from the tensioned side. The last step of the plan is the stem's butt position. Is it elevated or flat on the ground? Remember, the goal of the 5-step plan is to identify risk so you can be safe and place your body properly. Topping and limbing is a very hazardous job. Many reactionary forces are constantly at work. You have to understand the reactionary forces of the wood you are cutting and the reactionary forces of the chainsaw being used in many different positions. Proper starting methods, proper grip, wise use of the chain brake, and proper bracing methods all come together to allow you to work safely at work speed. Now, let's look at the 4 specialized cutting techniques that are useful in tension wood situations. Limb locks and top locks are basically offset cuts designed to keep stored energy from being released violently. The tree's pressure is locked by its own tension. Besides providing a strong measure of safety, locking cuts will help prevent the sawbar from being pinched or stuck, which results in lost production. Even with the best planned technique, it is always a good idea to carry a plastic wedge for those situations when a pinch occurs. Let's review the 4 techniques. The first technique is a top lock. The top lock is used when pressure is observed. Always make the top cut first. If tension is present, the saw will start to be pinched or bound as it cuts down. Once this binding load is identified, make the second cut under the stem, offset to the butt end of the tree or limb. The offset creates a shelf or shoulder, which forms the lock. Do not make the second cut towards the tree top or the saw will be pinched. Now the next technique is the limb lock. The inside cut is made first. Again, when pressure is noticed, compressed wood, make the second on the outside, tensioned wood. The cut should be offset, which creates a shelf or a shoulder to keep the stored energy contained. Placement of your body is important. If possible, make this cut from the good side of the stem. If the cutter is forced to make this lock on the bad side, be sure to keep your legs back and away from the swing path of the limb, just in case the lock fails. The third technique is the tongue and groove lock. It is used when there is a chance of the stem or top rolling, such as on steep terrain. Always keep your body on the uphill side. The cutter may choose which side to set the tongue, as in the case of cutting grade logs. Use the attack portion of the saw to bore cut, then make a top and bottom cut offset from the groove cut. The last technique is for spring poles. If at all possible, leave it alone. If you must cut, then make a plan and identify the sweet spot. A cut here will neutralize the reaction forces. Your body needs to be at a 45-degree angle on the good side of the spring pole away from the reaction. Imagine a vertical line from the side of the pole and a straight horizontal line at the top. The 2 lines intersect and form a 90-degree angle. Halfway between the lines is the 45-degree angle known as the sweet spot of the spring pole. At this point, you can cut it on the back side or the underside. If the cut is made on the back side of the pole, you are cutting tensioned wood that is released quickly. If you shave under the bow, compressed fiber is released at a slower rate and could be considered safer than cutting on the back side. If you make the cut on the back of the pole, you are cutting tensioned wood, which releases quickly. After releasing pressure, trim the stem at ground level. Please remember, do not manually cut spring poles if mechanical equipment is available. Another type of damage you may encounter is uprooted trees with the root system still attached. These pose a special problem. Their weight places pressure on the stem, and once they are released, will likely flop back into the hole. While entering the work area, the timber cutter must be taking in information and forming his plan. Be certain to check for overhead hazards. Spring poles may be present. If possible, remove them by using safe and proper techniques. On small root clumps, you can see behind them and avoid having any nearby workers being struck. It's good to know where everyone is at all times. Glance up and search frequently. There are many safe techniques for removing tree stems from their root systems. In this situation, the cutter chooses not to expose his body to the bad side of this stem. Using his knowledge of the saw's reactionary forces, he chooses to cut the bad side with a pushing chain, or the top side of the bar. The first cut is made less than halfway through the bad side. The second cut is made less than halfway through the remaining side. A 1-inch section of fiber has been left in the center of the stem. The third cut removes the fiber. If a binding situation occurs, a locking cut can be made to avoid the saw from being pinched. Important to this situation, the cutter never exposed himself to the tensioned side of the blowdown. Not all root clumps or balls are the same. Root systems may be high enough to block vision and allow someone to approach without notice. An observer is helpful to police the area. The observer's job is to aid the cutter by making sure the crew is all clear before the operator releases the stem from the root system. After getting positioned on the good side of the stem, the saw is properly started and the cut is applied. The timber cutter is able to check with the spotter before releasing the tensioned stem. There will be situations where pressures and tensions make it difficult to determine a safe plan. In that case, you can use available equipment to minimize risk. Stabilize the stem and use hand signals and eye contact during the equipment positioning. Remember, the man on the ground has maximum exposure. Make the cut and, as mentioned earlier, be prepared to use a plastic wedge if you feel the saw bar pinch in the making. Move off to a safe distance and signal the skidder operator to lift and pull. The stem can now be limbed and bucked in a safe position that you determine. A tongue and groove lock was used in this situation. This lock keeps the root clump stable, avoiding a violent tension release. Mechanized logging equipment can assist the stumper. The skidder can lift and break the lock in one smooth motion. With the timber cutter out of the danger zone, the stem can be removed mechanically. The skidder pulls the tongue out of the groove. Another problem you may encounter is a side-loaded stem. Great care must be used with this hazard, as this extreme amount of tensioned wood can be fatal. In this sequence, the cutter sees the obvious tension that was created by the storm. He positions his body on the compressed side of the blowdown. His body is on the safe side, away from the swing path of the stem. Side load is obvious in this scene, as well as a spring pole being present. By using a shield tree, the cutter is able to remove the spring pole and release the stem from the root clump. All of this work is done from the good side, and the cutter never exposes himself to the tensioned side of this risk. Manual felling is the most hazardous job in the woods. Manual felling should only be done by highly trained and educated employees. The manual felling process mandates a proper face notch with no bypass. In other words, both cuts of the notch must meet. The face notch actually sets the length of the hinge wood to be used to fell the tree. The hinge on the tree has two major purposes: to direct the direction of fall and to control the tree during its fall to the ground. Proper hinge wood reduces the risk of rebound. The felling section of this film is very limited. For now, remember this: only trained professionals should attempt manually felling activities. Hopefully, today you've learned some new safety guidelines that will make your work safer. Just remember that cleanup of storm-damaged timber is a slow and tedious affair, and much more hazardous than conventional harvesting. Take your time, plan your work, and practice safe techniques. What you heard today may prevent you hearing this tomorrow.